You ever feel like you're behind in life, even though you know you're capable of more? Like you see people around you moving forward, building things, progressing, and you're just stuck in the same place. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't care, but because something just isn't clicking. And the frustrating part is you can see it. You can imagine exactly where you could be. You know what your life could look like if you just executed consistently, but you don't. And over time, that gap between what you could be and what you are starts to feel heavier and heavier. If that feels familiar, there's a reason for it. Because feeling behind isn't always about ability. Sometimes it's about how your mind works. One of the biggest reasons you feel behind is because you're highly aware of your own potential. Most people don't think that far ahead. They act, they move, they figure things out as they go. But you don't just act. You think about what you could become. You picture the ideal version of your life. You imagine the outcome before you even start. And that sounds like an advantage, but it creates a problem. Because when you can clearly see the ideal, anything less feels wrong. Starting small feels insignificant. Progress feels too slow, and imperfect action feels uncomfortable. So instead of moving forward imperfectly, you hesitate. You don't just want to start. You want to start the right way. You want your effort to matter. You want your time to be used correctly. You want to make sure you're not wasting energy on the wrong path. So you think, you plan, you analyze, you try to optimize before you even begin. But the more you think about it, the harder it becomes to actually move. Because now every step feels like a decision, and every decision feels like it needs to be the right one. And this is where things start to slow down. Because while other people are learning through action, you're trying to learn everything before action. You want clarity before movement, but clarity doesn't come before action. It comes from it. So instead of progressing quickly, you get stuck trying to figure everything out in advance. And that delay adds up. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and suddenly you feel like you're behind. Another reason you feel behind is because you see too many possibilities. You don't just see one path, you see multiple. You think about different outcomes, different directions, different versions of how things could play out. And that sounds useful, but it creates hesitation because no option feels perfect. Every path has trade-offs. Every decision has downsides. So instead of choosing and moving forward, you wait. You try to find certainty. You try to make the best possible decision. But the more you search for certainty, the more stuck you become. And while all of this is happening, something else is draining you. Thinking, constant thinking. Your mind is always active, analyzing, questioning, reflecting. Even when you're not doing anything physically, you're using mental energy, a lot of it. So by the time it's actually time to act, you feel drained. Even simple tasks feel heavier than they should, not because they're hard, but because your brain has already been working all day. This creates another problem. You start to associate effort with exhaustion. So when something requires focus, your brain resists. Not because you don't want to do it, but because it's trying to conserve energy. And over time, this makes it harder to stay consistent because every action feels like it costs more than it should. Another reason you feel behind is because you compare yourself differently. You don't just compare outcomes, you compare potential. You look at other people and think, if they can do that, I should be able to do more. But you're not comparing yourself to who you are now. You're comparing yourself to who you think you could be, and that creates pressure because no matter what you do, it never feels like enough. You might make progress, but instead of feeling satisfied, you think about how much further you could have gone. You notice what's missing. You focus on what's not done, and that makes it feel like you're not moving forward, even when you are. Over time, though, this creates a cycle. You start something, you make progress, then you analyze it, you question it, you lose interest, you stop, then you restart again later, and every time this happens, you feel like you're starting from zero. But you're not actually starting from zero. You're just stuck in a loop. A loop of thinking to starting to doubting to stopping to restarting. And the more times you go through that loop, the more it feels like you're not getting anywhere. Another thing that keeps you feeling behind is your relationship with interest. You rely on it more than you realize. You act when something feels engaging. You move when something captures your attention. But once that feeling fades, your momentum fades with it. Because once you understand something, it becomes predictable. And once it becomes predictable, it becomes less interesting. So you move on. Not because you don't care, but because your brain is constantly looking for something more stimulating, something new, something engaging. And consistency often requires doing things that are repetitive, things that feel slow, things that don't feel exciting in the moment. And that's where the disconnect happens. Because real progress isn't always stimulating. It's often boring, it's often repetitive, and if your brain is wired to seek stimulation, staying consistent becomes harder. So you end up in this strange position where you're capable but inconsistent, where you understand but don't execute, where you see the path but don't walk it fully, and over time, that creates a feeling of being behind. But here's the part most people don't realize. You're not behind because you lack ability. You're behind because your strengths are working against you. Your awareness, your ability to think deeply, your ability to see multiple perspectives, your need for meaning. All of these things are advantages, but without control, they slow you down. So what do you actually do about it? Not by trying to think less, not by forcing motivation, and not by waiting until everything feels right. You fix it by changing how you act. Instead of waiting until something feels clear, start before it does. Instead of trying to find the best path, pick one and adjust as you go. Instead of needing motivation, lower the standard for starting. Make it easier to begin. Remove the pressure, because once you start moving, something changes, clarity shows up, momentum builds, and the thing that felt overwhelming becomes manageable. You don't need to solve everything. You just need to start. Because the people who move forward faster aren't always smarter. They just act sooner. You're not behind. You've just been thinking instead of moving. And once you understand that, you can finally change it.